Hello and welcome to Half Court Press. He's Wilson Moore. I'm Jon Walker. Thanks for joining us today. Wilson, it's been a little bit.
It has been.
It has been, I think, a month and 2 days since our last off-season episode. But I think it might be safe to say that this is our first official episode of the new season.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
We are a little more than a month away.
Practice has started for both teams.
Practice is starting. And we've got a pretty packed episode today.
We do.
But before we get into all of that, how are you, man?
I'm doing pretty well. You know, I'm glad to be back in the swing of things.
Feels
you know,
good.
Yeah, it does. Like, Nebraska had a little bit of open practice yesterday. Just walked in the gym, you know, hearing the shoes squeaking against the floor, just like the sound of like dribbling as like all is right.
It's like one of those things that you're absolutely sick of hearing in mid-January,
yes.
But come September, it's like the most refreshing sound
music.
ever.
Yeah.
No, man, it's been a doozy and a dandy. We've been pretty caught up with Nebraska football, and that's kind of taken us, you know, right up to this point. Pretty exciting season for them. But this is a basketball podcast, and so we're gonna talk some hoops. Both schools have a little bit of recruiting news. Both schools now know their full schedules for the 24-25 season. You've talked to Fred Hoiberg already at an availability, and we're recording this on Wednesday morning, and I'll talk to Greg McDermott.
I think we both had to think about that.
Yeah. Maybe a good thing, maybe a bad thing. But a thing nonetheless. and so Creighton has its first practice this afternoon. We'll get to talk to Greg McDermott and a couple of players, but we're going to talk about it all and maybe a little bit more at the end. So stay tuned. I think recruiting is kind of the way to go, Wilson. Before we really dive into the schedules, which will probably be the big point today. But both Creighton and Nebraska are on the board in 2025. Tell me who the Huskers' first commit is in this year's class now, I guess.
Yeah, the Huskers landed Quentin Rimes, a wing from Arizona. Kind of interesting thing about Nebraska's recruiting. I think this gives you some insight into the way Fred Hoiberg builds his team every year. I've been on the beat for a little over a year. This is only the second high school recruit they've gotten in the past year. They build out of the portal. That's not a secret. And the last recruit they got, also a 2025 commit, who reclassified to 2024.
Yeah.
That's Braden Frager. So Nebraska is now back on the board with a 2025 commit. Quentin Rimes, really interesting kind of backstory for this guy because he was not super highly recruited up until like this summer. He had a really good weekend in Wichita, like an AAU tournament, and that put him on the board.
That's how it happens, man.
Yeah. Interesting kind of, I hesitate to say polarizing prospect because that feels a little dramatic, but like he had most of his offers were like mid-major offers, yet 247 had him as a 4-star recruit.
Oh, okay.
So kind of, again, the profile of a guy who there isn't a huge consensus on, a guy who his recruitment didn't really get going until just a few months ago, but he fits into what Nebraska likes. It does not take much looking at the roster to know Nebraska likes its big guards.
Yep. Welcome to the Big Ten.
Exactly. You look at the guys Nebraska has gotten in the past 2 years, just rattling off a few: Bryce Williams, Braden Frager, Gavin Griffiths. These are all like 6'6" to 6'8" wings who are pure shooters and have, the length and versatility to fit into what Nate Lenzer is going to want them to do on defense.
And I wonder if that's one of those things with the Rimes where it's like he just simply didn't have the exposure before this summer. Excuse me. And then you go to one of those AAU events and this coach is there and this coach is there, and maybe this school sent an assistant because their head coach was wherever, at a grassroots event, at a EYBL, right? So that's kind of what it sounds like. That's odd that when I read your story, I was like, oh, a 4-star. But I didn't know that he obviously didn't have
he had an offer from TCU, but like in the weekends before, he visited Nebraska the weekend of the Illinois game.
Okay.
The weekends before that, he was at Boise State and New Mexico.
Oh.
So, like, Mountain West. And, you can even make the case, RIP to the Mountain West in 2 years. But you can make the case the Mountain West is, like, the next, power conference, like after, in basketball specifically, like, give me the Mountain West over, honestly. Some like power conferences when you think about who they got in there, like San Diego State.
Can't say that on a podcast with Creighton basketball mentioned.
Yeah, my apologies.
Man, too early. No, it's good. It was always interesting to see how they were going to handle it, and this goes for Creighton too. Creighton has kind of done it a little bit differently than Nebraska has, in the sense that they have this homegrown core: Mason Miller, Jason Green, Ryan Kalkbrenner, like all of these guys, and then they go and get a couple of splashy transfers to add to the core. And so it's different almost that Nebraska wants to kind of have those veterans that are experienced, who have played, whether it's, power conference or not. They want that experience, on-court experience, and then they'll add through high school recruiting. Yeah. And so it's different. But I'm curious how both of these schools kind of changed their philosophy now that everything's going to swing back to high school recruiting. I think. I mean,
with the COVID year guys are gone after this year.
Exactly. So I'm not really sure. The portal will always be prevalent.
Yeah.
Duh. But yeah, I think you'll see the pendulum swing back toward high school recruiting for sure, more so than it was the last few years.
Yeah.
Which kind of takes me into my Creighton side of things. They landed a pretty highly touted prospect, Hudson Greer, 4-star guard. Arguably, depend on who you ask, arguably the highest rated recruit in program history. Depends what service you use, obviously. But Hudson Greer, first commit in 2025. That happened a couple of weeks ago. He picked the Jays over Kansas and Alabama. So he's 27 in ESPN overall, not guard. And he's kind of that like 6'6" swing man type of guy anyway. So guard is loose here. He's ranked 27 overall by ESPN, 34 by Rivals, 36 by On3, 58 by 247. Creighton's been on him for a while. Jay's offered in June of last year. He was on an official visit for the Central Michigan game in December. They blew them out by like 40 or whatever it was, 102-69 or something like that. So he's been a priority. They finally connect on him, and he's kind of that 3-level scorer. I hate to use this comp when the kid has not stepped on campus yet. A little bit like Baylor Shireman in the sense that he has a knack for rebounding, can be a 3-level scorer, high IQ. So they, Greg McDermott and his staff, they actually, they went out to see him the other day. Hudson Greer, he'll play a senior year at Montverde Academy, which is, as highly touted of a prep school as you could possibly imagine in basketball. Both Creighton and Nebraska on the board, man.
Yeah.
It feels weird to already think about next year in a way. But that's what the coaches are doing.
Yeah.
So that's what we'll do too, I guess.
Yeah. Nebraska's not done either.
No.
Only, Nick Janowski would have been their only 2024 recruit if Frager hadn't reclassified, but they've got some space to fill, both because of Frager's reclassification. That's another spot in the 2025 class, and a whole bunch of guys out of eligibility at the end of this year. Jawan Gary, Bryce Williams, Raleigh Wooster, Andrew Morgan, Braxton Mia. They're going to have some spots to fill, and they are still pursuing some guys. Amari Bynum, an example, former Omaha Bryan
Link
guy.
Academy now.
Currently Link Academy, that's right. Tommy Aneman, who was on the visit at the same time as Rhymes. He's a big man from originally North Dakota. Okay. Now he's in the Twin Cities. Now he's in Minnesota. Creighton Durham Hall High School. Yeah. Creighton Durham Hall High School, the alma mater of Joe Mauer. Arguably the greatest Minnesota athlete of all time. Certainly the greatest Minnesota high school athlete of all time.
Sure. You would know.
Yeah. No, he was like a star. He was committed to Florida State as a quarterback. Okay. And then he was the number 1 overall pick in baseball.
Yeah, that's the way to do it, man. He was like everything Kyler Murray wanted to be.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Yeah. But Nebraska's big on him. Tommy Aneman, it would be a pretty big get for them. Smooth, skilled, big man. I think 6'10", 6'11", somewhere in there. He would be a big get. And Antoine West making his decision between Nebraska and Creighton, Nebraska and Purdue on October 1st, which I don't think I need to tell anyone. He's from Ohio. I don't think I need to tell anyone Nebraska stealing a recruit out from Matt Painter's backyard would be a major, major win.
It would. And Creighton's kind of been one of those similar situations with Eric Rybe. I've asked a couple different people, and they also could not clarify. But he's a 7-footer, one of the top centers in 2025. He is, I think I said this maybe last month when we recorded. In my opinion, he is Creighton's highest priority target in next year's class because he's a 7-foot center. He would immediately have a chance to compete for the void that Ryan Kalkbrenner will leave after this year. Fred King's still going to be on the roster, I'd imagine, if he wants to be. Obviously, he dipped in the portal this offseason, then came back. I'm assuming they'll bring in another big man, like a transfer big man. But Eric Rybe would be in the mix, unquestionably. And so I think he is the priority target. They Greg McDermott in I believe one assistant, maybe a couple, went out to see him in Maryland the other day. But he's also recently been on a string of visits to Indiana and Kansas and UConn. And so the recruiting trail is heating up for one of the top centers in the country. And Creighton still, as far as I know, they're still trying to pursue him. Like I said, they went out there the other day, and then they hosted Cortland Muldrew on campus over the weekend on Friday. That visit went well, I was told. So that's another 4-star guard, and you're starting to see the effects of those COVID years, right? Yeah. Like Stephen Ashworth is going to be done after this year. Ryan Kalkbrenner is going to be done after this year. So Creighton's immediately recruiting point guards in 7-footers. So that's kind of where I think the pendulum swings back. And we're going to swing one away from recruiting. And we're going to talk about schedules.
Let's do it.
Because we have them now. We spent months wondering when Purdue was coming to Lincoln again. They're not, I don't think.
They're not, no.
We spent months wondering, when UConn was coming to Omaha. They are. And a lot deeper league the Big Ten is. And we know now. We don't have to ask any of those questions because we know. And I'm sure anybody listening to this has already seen and formed their own opinion on Creighton's schedule, on Nebraska's schedule. What are your takes on the Husker slate for this winter?
The biggest thing that jumped out to me was, Nebraska could really get hit with a steel chair in the first 5 or 6 games.
Yeah.
Just when you go through that schedule, and it is beginning in December with by going to Michigan State in East Lansing. After that, Nebraska hosts Indiana. Then a month,
that's
the
so
weird
brutal
Big Ten schedule. Back at it January 4th, UCLA, Iowa, Purdue, Rutgers. I have no idea how good Rutgers is going to be. I mean,
lost a little bit,
gained a lot, a bit.
Right.
But it's also like they're leaning on freshmen, and
correct.
That's just you never know how that's going to go.
Yeah.
But in any case, that is a hammer of like a 5 or 6 game start to the season. Now, there's the other way to look at this. Nebraska has a relatively new core.
Sure.
And that's the nature of the way they build through the portal. You're going to be replacing a lot over the offseason. And that is going to be like, okay, welcome to the Big Ten, guys who weren't in the Big Ten before. Like, this is it. But on the other hand, if Nebraska goes 3-3 in that stretch, that's not bad. That's surviving. And then they can do what they did last year, which is beat the teams they're supposed to.
Yeah.
I think it's such a common thing of just historically Nebraska basketball was losing to teams they were supposed to beat.
Yeah.
And last year, none of that happened. They played an easy non-conference slate. They had to basically sweep that, beyond like Creighton and Kansas State. They needed to beat all the, Fairleigh Dickinsons and Bethune-Cookmans of the world, both of whom they play this year. And they did that. They handled all of the teams that they were supposed to in Big Ten play and won enough of the games, beating Purdue and Wisconsin, two of the big moments of the season. Big win.
All in Lincoln.
Yes, all in Lincoln. Beating Northwestern was quietly a pretty big win for their tournament resume. But doing all that, and that was enough. That got them into the tournament. I think this schedule gives them an opportunity to do that again this year, but it starts really hard, and they're going to have to weather the storm. But, if they can get through that, if they can play well in those 6 games, I think that will be evidence like, hey, this is a good team again, and now they are very well suited. They have gotten through the hardest part of their schedule, and now they can move forward from there.
And I think having that introduction early, it can derail things. Yeah. I'm not saying that it can't, but I think it's a good thing generally. Because if you can go 3-3 in those, what does the Big Ten play? 20 game conference schedule?
20, yeah.
Nobody's going to be undefeated in the Big Ten this year.
No.
And if they are, I'll do something outlandish on one of these podcasts, in March or whatever. Yeah. But nobody in an 18-team league, I get it, you don't play everyone, but nobody in an 18-team league is going to go undefeated. No. I wouldn't think.
And especially the Big Ten this year is so much more wide open. Like, last year it was generally like the consensus.
Correct.
Purdue is going to be the best team.
And Wisconsin was good for like 2.5 weeks.
Yeah.
And this year I just don't, Purdue's going to be good again, no doubt. But, I don't think you have that one dominant, overpowering team.
No, you don't.
And I think if Nebraska, would they finish 10-10 in the
12-8?
12-8, but they were only one win away from
two away from PBA. 10-0 at PBA.
Okay.
2-8 away.
That's so
on the road.
I think
12-8 total.
I think this is a year where 11-11 gets you a decent spot in the Big Ten tournament.
Yeah.
Just because of how much parity there will be in the league.
One of those early projections. I know we don't have Ken Pom yet,
sure.
But one of something like that. I don't think Bart Torvik's out yet either. But someone had 8 teams going 10-10 in Big Ten.
That's what I'm saying. I think that's a league this year where it's gonna be maybe easy to separate the top 2, top 3 teams, but they won't be unbeatable.
Yeah.
But then you get to that middle part, those middle 10 teams, it's a fist fight every single night. Absolutely. And that's kind of where that comes in. If you can beat a Northwestern, a team that's also probably going to be in there. Yeah. If you can beat Rutgers, another team that's probably going to be in that cluster, that's kind of where you build your resume, where you make yourself, if you will. So we'll see what Nebraska does. That's a pretty important 6-game stretch. Creighton has one of those too. It's not at the beginning of conference play. It is, I believe it starts late January and creeps into the middle of February, which is usually when Creighton starts to mesh. Usually, you talk about peaking late. Usually Creighton starts to peak that time of year, which is, what you want, obviously. So it's a 17-day stretch. That starts with Xavier, expected to be one of the top 4 teams in the league. And then it's at Villanova, at Providence, come back to Omaha to play Marquette and UConn back-to-back.
That is. I don't know if it gets any
And then you go to Madison Square Garden to play St. John's. That is a hellish 17-day, 6-game stretch that really can decide a lot of what happens in the Big East. I think Creighton's going to be preseason top 3 in the Big East. I don't know how they wouldn't be. And if that's the case, that 6-game stretch can be the difference between 2nd and pushing UConn for the league and 5th and playing one of those first-round games in the Big East tournament. So that's a pretty important 6-game stretch. But they had one of those kind of similar.
Similar
one of those last year.
like January last
year.
year.
Yeah, like toward the end of last season. It was like later. It like started early February and went through the end of the regular season. And I think they finished 4-2 in that.
Yeah.
And so that, that's fine. That's what you want. Again, peak late. Greg McDermott teams usually do. And so I think them getting that stretch that late will probably help them out a bit more than maybe one of those 6-game stretches to start conference play like Nebraska is going to run into. What else you got, Wilson? What else you think of the Husker schedule? You got anything else?
It's similar to last year where they play a pretty light non-conference schedule.
Yeah.
And I think that makes that 6-game stretch even more important. Like,
absolutely.
It's like, okay, here's a chance at 6 resume-building wins right here after very few of them in the non-con.
Yeah.
They got Creighton, obviously. That's a big game every year. They have St. Mary's at what is technically a neutral site, but look, they played Oregon State at the Pentagon last year, and it was louder in there than it is in PBA just because it's smaller and it holds noise. It was, I think, you can make a case the loudest any Nebraska game was in the Pentagon, and that's not, any knock on the atmosphere in PBA, but just, the way it holds sound. It's small, it's intimate, the crowd's right on top of everything. Sorry, what were you saying?
No, I covered a D2 regional there once, and I was like, there have to be 15,000 people here.
Yeah.
And it's like a 6,000 seat arena or something like that. It's nuts. It is incredible how up that place gets for a basketball game. Yeah. And that was for a D2 game. And so I can only imagine you throw Nebraska and Nebraska fans, 3 hours away in a 6,000 seat arena.
Yeah.
It's going to be bonkers.
Yeah, and at least with Oregon State last year, and I'd expect St. Mary's to be similar. The only Oregon State fans were, I assume, family.
Sure. Yeah, I think so. No, that'll be fun. That's kind of – you're in my head, man. So I have my takes pulled up from when the schedule released because I didn't want to, contradict myself or anything, obviously. My next point is that Creighton has a true home court advantage. So, talking about loud and how loud places get and whatnot, Creighton doesn't play a true road game until their non-conference finale at Alabama. That's on December 14th. So Creighton will be more than a month into the season before playing in a road environment. That usually bodes well for you because Creighton's been so good at home. But they don't really have a big road stretch until early January, thanks to the Big East schedule. They'll go to Marquette. 8 days later, they go to Hinkle, your stomping grounds. And
just
then
for one night.
Yeah, just for one night.
I covered some Indiana Fever games.
There. Perfect.
That was pre-Caitlin Clark era, so there were 7 people there. But
different now.
Yeah, they also ended that season by losing 18 straight games. Just how they got the number 1 overall pick to take Aaliyah Boston, and the number 1 overall pick again the next year to take Caitlin Clark.
Brutal.
Yeah.
Well, they have Aaliyah Boston and Caitlin Clark.
They do. Yeah. So, it worked clearly. That was their Philadelphia 76ers trust the process.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's, Creighton doesn't have a true road stretch until early January. Marquette, Butler, and then they'll host Providence and go to UConn and DePaul. So Marquette, Butler, UConn within the span of 11 days or whatever. That's probably the worst road stretch.
Yeah.
That they have, but Creighton was 14-2 last year in the CHI Health Center, and so them having more home games, they'll go to a Vegas. I should have led with that. They're not going to just play. Yeah, they're not going to just play at the CHI Health Center until December 14th. But yeah, they won't be in a true road environment, and they were 14-2 at home last year. So I think that bode well for the Jays.
Yeah.
You got one last thought on the schedule?
Yeah, I wrote about this, and I don't have the math right in front of me, but Basically, Nebraska's schedule is a little bit more balanced than it was last year.
Okay.
Last year, after conference play restarted in January, Nebraska had
odd that they do that, man.
Yeah, it's just, I'm used to it at this point. They've done it for a while now. I think since they added, I don't know. I don't know, so I'm not going to speculate, but because I forget. But anyway, between January and the end of the season, Nebraska had 2 full weeks off between games. They had 2 week-long stretches with no games. They have none of those this year. But the flip side of that is they don't have as many quick turnarounds as they did a year ago. They don't have as many 2 games in 4 days as they did last year. So they don't have those long layoffs. And, I think the one at the very end of the season, they had a week between their second to last game and their last game. I think that was helpful for Nebraska to kind of get healthy, get recovered. Sure. They don't have that this year. But they do have just a little bit more balance. They don't have to just turn around and play a game. I think we saw that last year.
Yeah.
They beat Purdue, super emotional, season-defining win. And then they were in Iowa City 2 days later. Yeah, and they don't have to deal with that as much this season. They have some of those, but not as many as they did last season. So I'm interested in how that helps, how that, what the general consensus is, just what a coach prefers, what players prefer on do you want that week off? Just a little more balanced makes life a little easier on us sports writers. We have a little bit more routine.
Doesn't it, man? Doesn't it? No, it's and Creighton has one of those. That's my third and final point too. But it's always weird when you have one of those weeks in the middle of the season. The Big East only has 11 teams, and so everyone has a bye week at some point, technically, where they'll play on a Saturday, not to play till the next Saturday. And I think it's strictly a preference thing. I don't really think it matters. Maybe if you're dealing with some injuries, whatever comes along the way during the season, sure. If you have a really bad stretch, sure. But some people want to just keep playing. Now, we've hit a stride. Say Nebraska gets really hot, and then they have to take time off. Creighton gets really hot, then you take a week off. What happens?
Yeah.
Now, the inverse is, and this is kind of what I said, Creighton does not have a week off in Big East play anyways until the middle of February. So they're going to be playing for a minute. But that week off comes right after the St. John's game as a part of that stretch. So that truly, for Creighton, will be a reset point.
Yeah.
One way or the other. It's, hey, we just went 3-3 in these games, and we have work to do over the last 2 weeks of the season.
Yeah.
3 weeks of the season, whatever it is at that point. Or it's, man, we just went 5-1 in that 6-game stretch. We need a breather. Yeah. And they're going to get one when they come back, too, because once they have the week off, they host Georgetown and DePaul. So they don't even have to leave Omaha. Yeah. And then you get, one of the worst teams in the league in DePaul, the worst team in the league. Who knows now with the coaching change? And we'll see what Ed Cooley's doing in Georgetown. But 2 of the last year's 2 worst teams in the league, you'll get them right off of a bye. So that'll be a good way to have a reset if you need it, and then kind of ease your way back into things with those 2 schools. I think it's a perfect bye week and a perfect 2 games to come out of it. But man, November 6th opening night for Creighton. What is that the same for Nebraska?
I believe it's November 4th for Nebraska.
So that's opening night for college basketball, and Creighton is waiting 2 days later. Womp womp. But Nebraska is going to open on opening night, official opening night.
Texas Rio Grande Valley.
Oh, okay, because then they're going to come here 2 days later and play Creighton.
Yeah, and I believe Fairleigh Dickinson is doing something similar. They're on both schedules.
FDU.
FDU, believe it.
FDU, believe it. That is one of my favorite March Madness calls. I think it was just all-encompassed. I think it was so perfect from Andrew Catalan.
Yeah.
Moment, FDU, believe it. That's so good, man.
I wonder how many of those calls, like how many iconic calls we missed out on just because they didn't happen. Because, look, maybe he came up with that off the cuff, or maybe he thought before the game, if it happens, this is what I'm going with. How many of those, with Bethune-Cookman when they were a 16 seed, did someone have some brilliant line, ready to go before the game, and then they lost by 40? Someone had in Memphis last year in Nebraska's regional. Longwood, the Longwood Lancers were there. I wonder, did someone have the Longwood upsets Houston
ready to go?
And it'll be lost to history.
No, I don't know. I do that sometimes with a tweet, with a story. Like when Creighton hosted UConn last year, I remember driving that day, and it was 65 degrees, 70 degrees. It was sunny, couple of clouds, blue sky. And I was like, it is too perfect of a day in Omaha, Nebraska for Creighton to lose this game tonight. And who knows at noon, right? But I was like, no, it's too perfect of a day. And so I got home. I was out doing whatever, and I got home, and I was like, I'm going to have a couple of tweets prepped beforehand. Wow. And so, that's what I did. So maybe. I don't know. I know I have a few tweets that have never seen the light of day because things didn't happen or did happen.
I think of that with stories. You're on deadline, so you write. Here's what we run if this happens. Yep. Here's what we run if this happens, and then it doesn't happen. You're just like, God, that was a great 200 words I wrote there. That's never gonna see the light of day now.
I know, man. We're, as we mentioned at the top of the show, we're a little bit more than a month away from basketball season. Yeah. Practices have started. Nebraska already started. Creighton will start Wednesday afternoon, couple of hours after we finish recording this. But you had a chance to talk to Fred Hoiberg yesterday.
That's right.
What'd you learn from the guy?
I know for the second year in a row, Nebraska is confident in its team.
Yeah.
I think this always gets very reinforced, especially when we talk to Fred early in the season, that they built this team very deliberately, and they saw what Sam Griesel and Emmanuel Bandamel gave him 2 years ago.
Yeah.
They saw what Josiah Allick and Rink Mast and Bryce Williams gave him last season, and they want to replicate that. These veterans who have been around, mature, know how to handle themselves. I think I thought just from looking at the roster that this team had a little more depth than a season ago, and Fred seems to think that too. Just talking about the guys competing for playing time and the versatility they have, the shooting they have with Connor Esijan and Gavin Griffiths now in the fold. So, I think a lot of it was just kind of standard, beginning of the season, optimism always springs eternal this time of year.
Everybody's going to the tournament in September.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, but I think I got the sense that just, Fred Hoiberg feels good about this team. There's optimism within that program that, that last year wasn't a fluke, that they, I think it really goes back to 2 years ago, like I was saying, with the veterans and how they came on at the end of that season, that they've figured out what it takes to build a team and to find the guys who are able to win in March.
And I read your story, and so that was obviously the big takeaway, because I was in Lincoln yesterday, so I listened to a little bit of Fred while I was trying to write my Nebraska football story. And this is not a group that's happy they made the tournament last year. They're now we want to get back.
Yeah.
And that's the mentality you have to have, is everyone in Lincoln, in this state, Fred Hoiberg, knows we have never won a tournament game.
Yeah.
It's not a secret.
Yeah.
And they're not shying away from that.
No.
We want to get back to the tournament. We were disappointed in our performance against Texas A&M last year. And so we want to get back there, and we want to be the team. And we said this last year too, obviously. So you have to do it. But we want to be the team to get Nebraska's first NCAA tournament win.
Yeah.
And that's what they're hungry for.
Yeah, and I think that to your point, that they're acknowledging that. You know, I remember just how in the locker room after Texas A&M last year, you could hear a pin drop. You know, that was, Nebraska's coming off its best season in 10 years, and no one was in the mood, for that kind of reflection after Texas A&M. That was a disappointed, angry locker room because they wanted to be the group that did it. They wanted to win a tournament game, and they wanted to be the team that won Nebraska's first tournament game. And that was a thing they talked about, in the months earlier. I remember Josiah Alex several times in as early as like January saying, we want to do something that's never been done at this program before. So just that Nebraska for the second year in a row just not running from it, this team has never won a tournament game, this program has never won a tournament game, and this specific group wants to be the one that changes that. I've
got one question for you after yesterday's availability. Why, Wilson, is this the team to do it?
Because they have taken steps forward in the past 2 years. They, like I said, I think the coaching staff has kind of found, what they want out of a team.
It seems like it.
Yeah. And, I think of course, the pitfall with that is when you're constantly building through the portal, you gotta hit on those portal guys, and they're more of a sure thing than a high school guy who's never played college basketball, but no one's, 100%.
No.
So that's the pitfall.
Yeah.
That's the thing. That's the uncertainty going into this season. But look, if all those transfers come in and play the way Nebraska is expecting them to, I think competing again this season is absolutely, on the table.
Yeah. No, I think so too. I've got a couple of questions kind of about Creighton heading into their preseason.
Because you have not talked to
them. As of this minute on Wednesday morning. Haven't talked to them. And so, I don't think I'm going to say anything or ask anything that anybody already isn't asking. Where did Fedor Zugic come from? How much eligibility does he have? How big of a role is he going to have on this team? Because I'm assuming he didn't come all the way to Omaha, Nebraska from Montenegro to sit the bench, to not be eligible. Like, I think one way or another he's going to have a pretty big role on this year's team. What does that look like? What does Greg McDermott on September 25th thinks that looks like? I don't know. The other thing is, are you immediately putting the onus on Pop Isaacs and Jemiah Neal or whoever plays that three? Maybe it's Fedor. Are you immediately putting the kind of onus on them to replace the scoring that you lost in Trey and Baylor? Or are you going to say, well, we need Stephen Ashworth to score 3 more and Kalk to score 4 more and, whatever that looks like? Is that the approach? And then I think one of the big things that every Creighton fan has wondered all offseason is, how does Jason Green fit into this? How much has Jason Green developed? Really, really, really came on at the end of last year, especially in March Madness. Everyone remembers the kind of game-sealing dunk against Oregon in double overtime. Had the great performance against UConn when Creighton beat them. And so where does Jason Green fit on this team? I'm not sure, because that is the area of this year's roster that probably, I don't want to say calls for the most concern. Like, concern's not the right word, but calls for the most uncertainty, because you have Isaac Trout, you have Mason Miller, you have Jemiah Neal, you have Jason Green, have Jackson McAndrew, the freshman.
He feels like a wild card in all of this.
He feels this is like, I've not heard this from any. This is just me spitballing.
Yeah.
Is there some galaxy-brained scenario where Creighton misses out on Eric Reeby, They still go bring in a portal big last year, but they just somehow, somewhere along the line, don't know where Jackson McAndrews' place is on this team. Say we get to December and they're like, well, he hasn't really played too much except for, the last 10 minutes against Houston Christian. So if we get into a situation like that, I wonder, because he's grown a little bit since he got on campus. If he's sitting at 6'10", 6'11", 6'9", 6'10", 6'11", do you redshirt and maybe play him as a 5 next year? Do you play him as a small ball 5 this year? Kind of like they tried to do with Isaac Trout, a season ago? I don't know. Like I said, I haven't heard that.
Fun.
I haven't heard that from anybody. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen. That's just like all of the things you think of when you're like, how are all of these pieces going to fit together? And I'm sure Greg McDermott and his staff are trying to ask the same questions of themselves and of the lineups, of the rosters, of the rotation. But yeah, I'm not sure. That I do know is that the biggest question for me lies kind of right there in the middle of the lineup. Who fills it? How long do they fill it for? Does something change mid-season? I don't know. But that's kind of what I'm hoping to get out of the first Creighton availability of the year.
And that is this afternoon, right?
That is this afternoon, man. Yeah, I mean, this is a team that forever, let's go back to the Missouri Valley days. Forever was, we got to make the tournament. We got to make the tournament. We got to make the tournament. Over the last decade, couple of seasons aside, Creighton's a sure thing for the tournament. Just about, man. And they've kind of gotten that much national respect. They play in the Big East. They hold their own, obviously, in non-con and in the league. But how do they kick the door down? Because this is a program that's no longer, nor should it be, but no longer happy with just getting to the tournament. Yeah. They've been to the second weekend 3 out of the last 4 years. How do you make it to the third? Yeah. I think that is kind of the question that I would like to see answered. And I guess more specifically, how does this preseason help you do that? Yeah. What do you want to use this preseason for to help you in March? I don't know if anything you do in September matters in March. I'm sure it does to a degree. But how do they use this preseason to assure that they have the best team they can entering March to try and get to a Final Four? Yeah. That's really kind of the only thing the program is chasing. Obviously a national championship, but just kind of on the ladder. Yeah. Like,
the next step.
It's the next step. The two biggest things are, they won the Big East regular season, I believe 2021, like the 2020-2021 season. Maybe that COVID season. I can't remember. But they've won a Big East regular title. So the next two things on the ladder are, can you go to Madison Square Garden and win the Big East tournament? And can you get to a Final Four? Those are the two objectives that they will be trying to chase. Not forever, maybe forever, I don't know. But that's kind of what they're chasing for the foreseeable future until they accomplish those and then set their sights on a national championship. Yeah. It's so hard to win in March, but what do you do in September that helps you win in March? That's the question. Wow. Yeah, man. We were talking to. I think that's all we have for basketball content today, but we were talking a little bit before we went live today, and I think we should give people some insight into what it's like to be a sports reporter. You don't have to say it, but you had an afternoon interrupted, Wilson.
I did, yeah.
Because sports.
Yeah, I was at Addie's here. I guess I said here. We know our office is no longer in downtown Omaha, but in downtown Omaha. Getting ready to watch my Minnesota Vikings, as I do every Sunday. Getting ready to watch Sam Darnold do what Sam Darnold does best, and that is dice apart defenses.
I wasn't a believer. I am now.
I always was. I don't bet against ginger quarterbacks like the. Andy Dalton doing it for the brand as well. But anyway, yeah, sit down, get ready to watch the Vikings kick off against the Houston Texans when my phone buzzes. Quentin Rhymes committed to Nebraska. I was not prepared for this.
Yeah, man.
He committed on his visit, like the last night of his visit. That doesn't happen all that often. Yeah, so I had to scramble. I had to write on my phone.
Yeah, is that when you're like sitting there writing?
Yes, yeah, on my phone. You know, messaging with this kid, trying to get him like on the phone as well. So I wrote on my phone. Eventually got like a quick draft of like, this guy committed. This is who he is. This is what he can bring. And then he called me at about 7 p.m. that night. So then I was
after the Vikings won.
Well, yeah, long after I had lit up my victory cigar by then. Yeah, and then I was able to talk to him, interview,
that
quotes,
jazz.
and include quotes. But yeah, that's a good way of putting it, as a peek into the life of a sports writer, and how things don't always go as planned, and you gotta go with it.
Yeah. That's all I got. That's all you got, Wilson?
I think that's all I got.
That's going to wrap it up for Half Court Press. Thanks for tuning in today. Wilson's going to have a bunch of stuff coming out from Big Ten Media Days next week. Yep. And I'll have some stuff coming out later next week too, not from Big East Media Days, because that's not until the end of October. But make sure to stay tuned for all of his preseason basketball stuff, all of my preseason basketball stuff. You can find it in the Omaha World-Herald and on omaha.com. We'll see you guys next time.